Right, so new scheduled banned and restricted announcement. Now, to no one's surprise, for class constructed, High Octane has been banned and Count Your Blessings has been partially hit. So you can no longer have any blue copies of Count Your Blessings in your deck. You, of course, can still have 3 red and 3 yellow, but this does do a couple things, right? It effectively lowers the health cap of Count Your Blessings since there are 3 missing from your deck and potentially your graveyard, and it also reduces your ability to save it and cycle it and get maximum value out of it for the late game, right? With blue being the maximum pitch value, you're most likely going to save the blue till the very end and then cash in on the life gain. So, yeah, both of them are banned, and LSS does do a good job, like usual, of going over their thoughts on the matter, but I think we'll go over all the main bullet points before we dive into all of that. So, for Blitz, Zen is no longer Living Legend status, right? If you missed it, at Worlds, they decide to double the threshold for Blitz, so it's no longer 500 points for a hero to hit Living Legend status. You now require 1,000 points, and as Zen had just been most recently hits Living Legend status, or moved to the alternative format, banned from Blitz. Banned from Blitz is the correct way to say it, right? So he has been brought back to Blitz, and I do find this kind of a curious choice, because for comparison's sake, right, Victor was at 450 points, right? So Zen, who now has a full 495 points to go before he hits Living Legend, in comparison to Victor, who now requires 100 points instead of 50. That's quite the contrast. I'm kind of curious why they didn't decide to, I don't know, give him 50% of his points. I understand, obviously, not doubling it, because then he just hit Living Legend anyway, but not, bringing him a little bit closer to still hitting Living Legend, since he is probably going to, again, run away with the meta, being how much he was a dominant presence prior to him hitting Living Legend. But nonetheless, along with Zen, we have Belittle being banned, and once again, I'm going to sing the thought of hero-specific bans, and I know it's not James White's prerogative, but nonetheless, I do think it is something that really should be considered and thought about, right? Again, in the case of Belittle, they clearly outline that they know it's a problem with Zen and not a problem all around, right? And I do want to state, for anyone who is a fan of Melody, Belittle was pretty much the last stone going for her, right? In terms of final act and setting up some combo shenanigans with all the draw gone, and now with Belittle, there is nothing that makes her even remotely competitive, I feel, right? For Blitz, you of course can still play her in some fun formats, but nonetheless, that's kind of sad to see. So once again, I will heavily advocate that I would much rather see hero-specific bans, especially when they know very clearly, right, that X hero is the problem, not the card all around. Nonetheless, Hadron Collider has also been banned, and Hadron Collider sort of feeds into some of the discussion here about High Octane and the general stat lines for cards. So in terms of Blitz, Hadron Collider is a static buff to your attacks for a turn, and with the ease of putting items into play, right, the focus on Data Doll and Dash.io, the issue becomes that the stat line of cards has just been increased too much, right? With Hadron Collider, in the case of Blitz and the fact that it's half-life, it's just too much of a increase to the density of damage, right? So Hadron Collider has been removed from Blitz. Then, for Living Legend, Open the Floodgate has been restricted to 1 copy, and Starstruck has been unrestricted. So, Open the Floodgates is, again, a card that I think should be a specific ban, especially not that he will at any time soon. Oslo, if he does hit Living Legend, Open the Floodgates does a lot for Oslo's game plan versus that of Kano. Kano obviously having his onboard button to push to get maximum value out of any wizard action versus the new gen of wizards that definitely have their entire engine built into your deck and cards rather than your hero ability, right? So in the case of Open the Floodgates for Kano, it is essentially a generate 1 resource with extra damage if you target your opponent, or targeting yourself, you can get away with a lot more, right? So basically, you pay 3 for Kano's ability, you get rid of an Open the Floodgate, you then pay an extra 2, you're drawing 2 cards back, say they're both blue, well now that's 5 resources turned into 6, so yeah. Or even if it's just 5 into 2 cards, it's still quite substantial, so it has been restricted, made it less easy to hit with Kano's ability, which I think is the main thing, but not outright removed. And then as for Starstruck, everyone is sort of coming closer to Stravo's dominance, so they feel that they can start relaxing some of the restrictions on Stravo and give him some of his power back, right? Which is good, because again, Starstruck for Bravo does a lot more, I feel, than Starstruck for Stravo. So again, I will wholeheartedly advocate hero-specific bans, please and thank you, especially as we continue to diverse the hero pool, and they all have slight different tweaks. Again, the majority of cards that I feel get hit equalizers in some sense, right? So for instance, all the card draw and everything like that, they can be a great asset to underdeveloped toolkits, especially in terms of the current meta. And then again, in problematic heroes, they know why they're problematic and why it's that hero's fault, less so than the card design, right? Nonetheless, for Commoner, Aether, Ironweave has been banned, right? And that is fantastic. It's great to see that, again, all the formats are becoming much more popular, and LSS are definitely keeping a close eye on everything going around. So that is, again, wonderful to see that, Classic Constructed is still the main engine for Flesh and Blood, but definitely all around better support for all the other formats, and therefore giving players a lot more variety of choice. Now, onto the bulk of the announcement, right? So, High Octane, they make a great presentation here using Wounding Blow, right? So, one thing Fab has done very well, given its 15 sets and 5 years of development so far, is work around a core stat line. That core stat line is exemplified here with Wounding Blow at 0 for 4 with 3 block, right? And there's a lot to unpack with that card, or a lot we could dig into. So, for instance, the fact that it's 4 attack means that to block it, you'll have to most likely 1 card an armor, 1 card or 2 cards, and you're going to get damage across, right? And that's the main takeaway. What we then go from, in the case of High Octane, is equating that to weapons, because weapons are, of course, on board infinite use, most likely, right? They also give you the value of cycling cards back and retaining cards for your deck to use later. So, generally speaking, they should be equal or lesser than cards. And again, Wounding Blow is a very vanilla card. So another comparison to make would be something like Scar for a Scar or Coax Commotion, which have the same stat line of 0 for 4, but then also a conditional effect, right? Scar for a Scar is less life, gains go again, right? And then Coax Commotion is a on-hit effect. So in that essence, 0 to 4 can be equivalent to a weapon, but anything greater than that should be probably more impactful than a weapon, and anything less than that should be akin to a weapon, right? So in the case of Anthros, the case is it's still 1 card to attack for 4, right? Making them equivalent, but then you do also have the conditional effect of Anthros, which I think sort of puts it over the line, right? But the overall arching problem comes in Mechanologist's class identity and its ability to have reusable weapons, right? Which is something that they do want to keep for Mechanologist, and therefore cards like High Octane or easy ways to stack up a bunch of action points then becomes a problem, right? Because if they don't have the once per turn action requirement, right, and they're just an action, even if they don't have go again, then it becomes an issue of action points. And High Octane was just allowing Mechanologist to accrue way too many action points way too easily, and then basically have a offensive overlap of damage that your opponent cannot actively contest, right? So if you think about it in this sense, you could play High Octane and your whole set of cards, and then that would probably end up depleting your opponent's hand. And then on top of that, you go into your pistol, right? So that is what they sort of want to avoid. They want it to still be reusable. They still want weapons to be meaningful for Mechanologists. They don't want it to be uncontested, right? They want it to be somewhere in between, right? Where you get a meaningful amount of extra uses or extra cards is what they're equating it to, but not as many as just running away with the game. So hence the ban to High Octane, but most likely we will see some sort of retooling of that type of card, and again, more usage for Mechanologist and their weapon. Now, for Count Your Blessings, one big takeaway is this line right here. So fundamentally, Count Your Blessings is not a problem. The problem is the lack of agency that currently exists to engage with control decks when they are this good, right? So again, the ability just to run all 9 Count Your Blessings and use that as control to subvert a ton of damage is very, very impactful, and it's the counterplay that your opponent has that is, again, the problem. So currently, we have Count Your Blessings, we have Sigil of Solace, we have Oasis Respite, we have these other ways to still gain life, to prevent damage, to negate and control your opponent's attacks and hits, but not as many things to counter. For instance, the only card that currently exists is really Poison the Wow. And in Fab, you're not really going to hold a card for the best case scenario. You're going to use it when it's impactful straight away, right? So Poison the Well has been used for counterplays against Oasis Respite, Knowledge the Ancestors, Life to a lesser degree, and Sigil of Solace, right? Which is the big issue, because it's not a card you can save for Count Your Blessings. So what we might see is, again, continued counters to this. For instance, we are getting more non-preventing damage prevention, right? That's a mouthful. So basically taking the damage prevention effects and making them obsolete. And overall, when it comes to Count Your Blessings, one thing that I think is sort of exemplified if you do give this a read is that they want this type of mechanic to exist in a sense that it helps prolong the game, right? It is something easily utilizable by all heroes and classes that allows them to run a lot longer, right? It gets you to your second cycle, third cycle, and so on. So that is sort of the direction that Fab is obviously heading, as outlined in the new, well, I should say the revised design principles, right? And I don't know if that's the best idea. One rationale for it, for again the move to damage prevention, life gain, is so that they don't have to change the stat line of cards, right? They don't have to power creep the game. But it is kind of curious to me, right? Because it's sort of a band-aid or a stopgap, just giving player access to these types of abilities and mechanics to, again, not only thin out their deck while preventing and prolonging the game, but also then fish for, X combo, X thing. And overall, it then devalues some of the other playstyles of decks, right? As they do sort of mention here, a control deck does not, in essence, have a lot of counterplay to it at the moment, right? Which then gives less of a toolkit to, aggro decks, wide decks, tool decks, however you want to phrase it, right? Control is just beating them out by the sheer ease of its card usage. So, yeah, Count Your Blessings is due to return, but hopefully we see some actual counterplay to it that, again, doesn't necessarily cost your deck vital other toolkits. So while Poison the Well is a nice card, stuff like Jagged Edge, which can be just an alternative buff card for your attack reaction that then does offer counterplay to those damage prevention effects, would be nice. So maybe, something like Death Scythe, where, again, your opponent can't gain life for a turn, or some other ways to intervene, but they do also have to be attached to cards that seemingly already exist, right? Which is, in essence, still another form of power creep. So, to sum it up, right, better than I, saying all that, until the card pool offers players more options to engage with Count Your Blessings, we are lowering the ceiling for the archetype by removing Klloo from class constructed, but there is still a good chance that the card will return in the future. Alright, with all that said, I think that is everything that we need to cover, alright? Yeah, perfect. Let me know your thoughts. Hope you enjoyed. See ya.